Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Mark, what should we call this conversation today?
I sense, Mary, that you have gleaned from my work with Dahlia Lithwick that we are strongly opposed to a Supreme Court curtain raiser. Is
like
that
allergic to the term, as far as I can tell?
Yes, indeed.
I have lost count of the number of times I've asked Slate's Mark Joseph Stern to tell me what the Supreme Court is about to do. Every October, the justices begin their official term on the first Monday of the month. Year after year, Mark walks me through the docket. But this is the year I learned just how much Mark has begun to hate doing that. Can I quote you to you?
Please.
You said, the start of term curtain raiser has moved from distraction to collusion. Those are fierce words, friend.
Fighting words, one might say. But I stand by them. I really think that covering this Supreme Court in 2025 as though it's just starting another term like any other. They're going to hear some big cases. Here's a little rundown of them. Who knows how they'll come out? Let's speculate. All of that gives the court more credibility and legitimacy than it deserves. And I think
it normalizes them.
It normalizes them. And even more importantly, it pretends as though they are engaged in some kind of judicial decision making, when I do not think that either their deliberations or their work product bears much resemblance to actual judging these days.
Mark knows this is not how a reporter usually speaks about the people he's covering. But over the course of his career, the Supreme Court's opinions have become less legally coherent to him. The conservative majority has overturned precedent again and again. Mark says some justices seem to be selecting cases specifically to pick political fights. Under the usual rules, he argues, many of the cases the justices are going to start hearing today should not be at the court in the first place.
Judging means taking the cases as they come to you and deciding the questions that need to be resolved for the nation. What this court is doing is reaching out and grabbing disputes that it doesn't need to hear for the purpose of checking off items on its agenda, which happens to be very much aligned with Donald Trump's agenda.
I think a lot of my listeners have gotten used to thinking of the Supreme Court as in Donald Trump's pocket. Or maybe it's the other way around and Donald Trump is in their pocket. But they're linked, is I guess what I'm saying. I've come to think of this term as an opportunity to learn just how linked they are.
I think that's a good framing. I would say, though, that when you go into it with an open mind like that, it's a little bit easy to get tricked. I would not go into this term thinking that we're truly going to learn something new about the fundamental dynamic at play, because I think that's set in stone.
So you're saying Supreme Court, they're more like stormtroopers for the Trump administration.
Pretty much. But if you ask them, they would absolutely believe, even if you gave them truth serum and said, what are you? Are you just a partisan hack? Every last one of the six would say, no, 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 we are judges doing our job.
Today on the show, will this term prove Mark right? We lay out the cases to watch. Just don't call it a curtain raiser. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Home Chef. It's that time of year, the days are getting shorter and a little crisper. If you're finding yourself craving some comforting home-cooked meals but don't have a minute to make that happen, Home Chef is there with easy oven-ready options and hearty recipes that hit the spot without the stress over what's for dinner. Home Chef sent me a bunch of their meals, and I gotta say, the thing I liked about it was that anyone in the house could make the food. I'm talking about my 17-year-old, I'm talking about my 11-year-old, probably. And at the end of the day, it was fresh food that we could all enjoy. We knew exactly what was inside of it. I loved that. Home Chef has everything you and your family need for hassle-free, delicious dinners with over 30 options a week, and they cater to a variety of dietary needs. Home Chef is also rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering What Next listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. So go to homechef.com/whatnext. That is homechef.com/whatnext for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/whatnext. Must be an active subscriber for that free dessert.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Okay, I think my listeners know your feelings about the Supreme Court. But let's go through a few cases just to kind of pull apart what's about to happen here. I wonder if we should start with Childs v. Salazar, which is one of the first cases that's going to be heard that's considered a quote-unquote blockbuster.
Yeah.
It's about conversion therapy and whether states are allowed to ban it. This is something that's happening in Colorado. Is that where this is?
Yes, this is a case out of Colorado.
So what's the story behind this case?
The story is that it's a manufactured case.
Tell me how you really feel.
Well, so it's a case brought by the Alliance Defending Freedom.
I'm familiar with them.
A very well-funded group that really engineers these test cases in order to get the Supreme Court to change the law to be more hostile to LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights in women.
They've done this before with the cake baking case, right? And with the web designer who wants to be able to turn people away.
Exactly right. And I think in theory, there's nothing wrong with bringing a test case if someone's rights are really at stake and they haven't faced punishment yet, but they fear that they will. It's legitimate for that person to sue. But what ADF does is really finesse the facts, often to the point of fiction, in order to justify creating a test case that the Supreme Court can use to change the law. That was true famously of the website designer, the wedding website designer who didn't actually get asked to design websites for a gay couple, even though she claimed that she was. And it's true in Childs v. Salazar because the counselor here, she's challenging a Colorado law that prohibits licensed counselors as a matter of professional conduct from trying to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity while on the job.
And you can see her point of view on YouTube. They've done a beautiful, well-produced video with this woman climbing mountains in Colorado or wherever.
And the mountains are a metaphor, Mary. Don't miss that. She's climbing that mountain all the way to the Supreme Court, baby.
She does not mention religion or gender for a really long time. She's just talking about
As a counselor, I help people who come to see me have conversations to clarify what their goals and their values are and to identify the ways in which they would like to live a life that is more fulfilling and more satisfying and more in line with who God created them to be.
But what's she really arguing here?
Well, so that's the big question so let me be clear. This does not apply to religious figures who are counseling members of a church or members of their community. It does not apply to parents, aunts, uncles, family members who are talking to a child. It doesn't even apply to licensed counselors who are off the clock. It is exclusively a professional regulation that says if you are working as a counselor recognized and licensed by the state of Colorado, then during that time, you cannot try to forcibly change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Has she been in this situation before?
No, she has never said that she wants to actively change the sexual orientation or gender identity of a minor patient. Instead, she claims that she wants to talk about gender identity. She wants to talk about sexuality and sexual orientation, but the law doesn't prohibit that. The law doesn't even prohibit her from saying, I think that kids who believe they're trans are not actually trans and should try to stop being trans. All that the law does is prohibit her from then actively applying that ideology to her patient, because in the judgment of the state of Colorado and a law enacted through the democratic process, that is harmful and discredited quackery, and children should not be subjected to it.
Also, weird litigant, maybe? Like, I could imagine a parent. Like, can you find a parent who's like, I can't find this service? And I don't know. Like, it seems weird in a bunch of ways.
So it's really funny you bring that up, because I agree, a parent or perhaps even a patient, that's really the person who is allegedly, if you accept the plaintiff's theories here, most harmed by these laws. But it seems like ADF couldn't find those people, and they couldn't even find evidence that those people really exist. And we know that because when it came time for ADF to show that this law was harming children by preventing them from getting the services that they wanted, they had to go to Reddit. And they had to quote anonymous posts on reddit.com that were allegedly by minors who sought out conversion therapy and couldn't find it.
Do you have any doubt about how the justices will rule here?
No, not at all. No doubt. No doubt whatsoever. The justices will strike down the Colorado law under the First Amendment, and in doing so will effectively overturn the similar or identical laws of another 24 states.
Okay, that's wild.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay, maybe let's go ahead to a different case. Louisiana v. Calais. This has to do with redistricting and the Voting Rights Act. And this is going to be heard a little bit later in October. Mm-hmm. Can you just explain what this case is all about?
Basically, when Louisiana redistricted earlier this decade, it's diluted the political representation of Black voters. And by that, I mean the state essentially packed a bunch of Black voters into one district and then sort of sprinkled the rest throughout these majority white districts, so that even though Louisiana has a sizable Black population, Black voters could only elect the representative of their choice in a single congressional district. That is a cardinal sin under the Voting Rights Act, as it has been interpreted for decades, even as it was interpreted by the Supreme Court in 2023 in a case called Allen v. Milligan. It was not that long ago.
I was going to say 2023 was like not that long ago. And I remember when this case was decided because it was a little bit of a surprise to you and Dahlia.
Yeah, it was a big deal. But the majority of the court in Allen v. Milligan said, yes, this is still illegal under the Voting Rights Act, and it is still important for courts to step in and strike down these maps if they dilute the votes of people of color.
Why would they be taking this up again now? Like, you literally just ruled on this.
Yeah, because you can't trust these jokers to stand by something they said yesterday. And even when they issue a decision that seems good, everything is always unsettled. Like, it's not just that this court disrespects precedent from decades ago, from the Warren court, from like the progressive. It's not just that. They don't stand by stuff that they themselves said recently because it might get in the way of their agenda today. Their agenda might have evolved and changed. And so now it looks very likely that John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh have decided, we don't want to be the saviors of the Voting Rights Act. We want to kill it.
Could this case be decided in such a way that the Voting Rights Act was simply nullified? What would it look like?
I think you could also just view this as a kind of absolute reversal of what the Constitution says and means and has said and meant since 1868 at least. The whole point of the Equal Protection Clause and then of the 15th Amendment, the idea was to protect the voting rights of Black people at all costs, and later, of course, all people of color. And now we're on the brink of the Supreme Court saying that when a court tries to protect the votes of people of color, it is actually violating the Constitution.
How could a ruling here impact something like, I don't know, the 2026 midterms?
In a huge way. Huge. There are maps in many red and purple states that have districts that currently elect Democrats because drawing them a different way would violate the Voting Rights Act. And if the Supreme Court disables or paralyzes the Voting Rights Act, then those states can suddenly redistrict straight away and give Republicans something like 7 to 13 more seats in the House, depending on how you count.
And they could do it like right away?
Yeah. So, Florida could, the day after this decision comes down, say, okay, we're drawing a new map and we're giving Republicans 4 more seats in the House.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. With the weather getting cooler, if you're like me, you're looking around for a couple of new items for your wardrobe, like a new sweater, some cute new kicks. And Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I went over to Saks.com to check out what they've got on tap, and I gotta say, what I love about clicking around their website is that every piece looks special, one of a kind, as if you'd walk into the office or a party and instantly grab everyone's attention. All the big brands are there, stuff like Alice and Olivia, the young and trendy stuff. I love that I can see the care in every piece Saks has chosen for their fall collections. Each dress or pant or shoe feels a little bit elevated. So if you want shopping to be fun and easy, head over to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
The holidays have arrived at the Home Depot, and we're here to help bring the excitement with decor for every part of your home. Check out our wide assortment of easy-to-assemble pre-lit trees so you can spend less time setting up and more time celebrating. And bring your holiday spirit outdoors with unique decor like one of our Santa inflatables. Whatever your style, find the right pieces at the right prices this holiday season at the Home Depot.
Let's talk about the cases that are going to impact the Trump administration directly. There are a couple of cases that are going to specifically look at how the president has attempted to fire some leaders in the government, the FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter and Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Tell me about these two women, these two cases.
The Supreme Court has, over its shadow docket, allowed Trump to fire Rebecca Slaughter, several other members of independent agencies who are protected against removal by federal statute. So this is all, I think, the best example of cases that the Supreme Court really shouldn't even be involved with, because the precedent here is super, super clear.
So they could have just denied this and been like, yeah, you can't fire these people. See ya.
Yes. They obviously should have done that, because 90 years ago, in a decision called Humphrey's Executor, the Supreme Court ruled that Congress could create agencies whose leaders were protected against removal by the president without a really good reason. And Congress said, look, we want these agencies to wield their power in a way that benefits the American people at large, not in a way that benefits the party that happens to control the White House. So we're going to give these agencies some buffer to prevent the kind of political partisan pressure that can transform their mission from, an attempt to regulate the economy in the benefit of all to an attempt to get more members of their party elected to office.
So just the fact that the Supreme Court took up these cases is a not great sign.
Not great sign. And also took up one of these cases and asked specifically, should we overturn Humphrey's executor, the 90-year-old precedent that I was just describing? So Trump has broken the law in ways that no president has for at least 90 years. He has fired these people for no good reason from the federal government. He has exerted absolute partisan control over these agencies. And rather than stopping him, or at least saying, look, you have to wait until we overturn this precedent, the Supreme Court has allowed him to do that and done it over the shadow docket with virtually no explanation. So there are a lot of tells here that the court is going to do what it has teed up, which is overturn Humphrey's executor and let Trump take control over every agency, something that really no president has ever done before. And it's why in some ways I say that Trump will be the most powerful president in American history, because independent agencies have existed since the very first Congress. And moving forward into the future, there will be none or maybe one, which is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Lisa Cook case is the one in which the Supreme Court is like, oh, maybe we should not be dabbling around with the Fed governors.
So that's the other case here. And it's really interesting because in these earlier shadow docket decisions where the Supreme Court let Trump fire all these other agency leaders, it said, just to be clear, we think that the Federal Reserve is different for reasons that don't make a lot of sense. The court has said that it has a unique history and a unique structure, and that it has a historical pedigree that's different from these other agencies. I and many others don't think that's actually true. I don't think that it is.
It does set monetary policy, which impacts everyone's pocketbook, though.
Yeah, well, and that's according to the Supreme Court's own reasoning, that's an executive power that should belong to the president. But the court seems to want to carve out this one exception that says that the president can't fire members of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. And a cynic might think that that's because these are relatively smart people. Some of them are actually smart. They all understand that central bank independence is key to a thriving economy, and that nations that have seen the independence of their central banks taken away or diminished have very quickly been thrust into hyperinflation or depressions. And so perhaps these justices simply don't want Trump to destroy the Federal Reserve and thereby plunge the nation into an economic crisis that would tank all of their 401ks.
Are you kind of curious to see, how do they decide this one? Grimly curious?
Totally.
How are they going to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a little bit of Joker-esque nihilism about this one, just because I want the Federal Reserve to be independent as a matter of policy and as a matter of law. I think it's perfectly legitimate for Congress to limit partisan interference here. But I also want the FTC to be independent. I want the National Labor Relations Board to be independent. I want all these other agencies to keep their independence. And the Supreme Court and Trump have taken them away. So why should the Fed be special? I don't really think there's a compelling reason. And I think at a minimum, it'll be fun to watch the conservative justices squirm as they try to devise one out of thin air. This is all uncharted territory, and I'm fascinated to see how the justices deal with it, because it is a mess that is almost entirely of their own making.
Okay, one more set of cases. These are about presidential tariffs. The cases are known as Trump v. VOS selections and Learning Resources v. Trump, but just the tariff cases. Let's just go with that. Are they being heard on the same day, thrashed together?
Yes, they are. They're all being consolidated into essentially one case that asks, are these tariffs legal or not?
And what's the reasoning here? I know one case they talked about the emergency nature. Is this actually an emergency? Do we need emergency tariffs? Is that what's at issue here?
Basically, yes. So I want to lay this out up front because I think it's important to understand. There are absolutely federal statutes that allow the president to unilaterally impose tariffs, but they require a great deal of process and deliberation, and they have restrictions. The tariffs are time limited. They can't go above a certain rate. All of that the president can use if he wants to start a trade war. But Trump didn't use those statutes because he didn't want any limits. He wanted absolute discretion to slap any tariffs on any country at any rate for any amount of time.
And he's used that discretion,
He's using
man.
it. He's using it, Mary. Oh, yeah. We are under one of the, highest tariff regimes in modern American history, probably the highest. It is extraordinary.
So who do you think has the upper hand here?
So this is another interesting case where I think it'll be fun to watch the justices squirm. because the Republican-appointed justices have created something called the major questions doctrine, which we've talked about on the show, where they say that a question of major economic or political significance needs to be resolved through clear language in the law. So this came about because Democratic presidents were trying to use capacious or vague language in existing statutes to enact new programs. Biden's student loan program, Biden's climate regulations, Biden's eviction moratorium, basically a bunch of stuff Biden wanted to do. The Supreme Court blocked by saying, look, this is a major question. So if the president wants to do it, it needs to be very, very explicitly authorized by Congress.
Slapping new taxes on like everything I buy seems like a major question to me.
You would think so, wouldn't you, Mary? I think so too. And I think if there is any legitimacy to the major questions doctrine, this has got to be the case to prove it. Because, like, you know, if forgiving $10,000 of a bunch of people's student loans is a major question, surely making trillions of dollars in tariff revenue by punishing dozens of other countries for no real reason is also a major question that Congress needs to clearly authorize. And Congress hasn't. It just hasn't. And it's not going to. So, you know, the question here is, will the Republican appointed justices show consistency? Will they rule against Trump using the major questions doctrine the same way that they ruled against Biden? And I don't know the answer. And I think that this may well divide the right flank of the court, because some of these justices just want to rule for Trump no matter what. Or the majority could use this as an opportunity to prove that it is principled on the application of this major questions doctrine and to say, look, we ruled against Biden, now we're ruling against Trump.
Okay, you seem pretty pessimistic here, Mark. I'm not going to lie.
Well, you know, we haven't even gotten to some of these other cases, and that is another reason why I don't think it's fair to do a term preview, because there's so much coming and so much more beyond that you can't capture it all in one conversation or one piece. And on top of everything that we've discussed, the Supreme Court never really ended its last term because it has been using the shadow docket to rule in favor of Trump like every other freaking day. I mean, that's barely an exaggeration, right? Every week or every other week, the Supreme Court, since last June, has been issuing these unreasoned or barely reasoned decisions that just hand Trump a win and overturn a lower court decision without telling us why.
You went to law school. Do you ever wonder if, like, you and the justices at the Supreme Court are practicing the same kind of law?
Well, okay, that's a very good question. You know, I think that the best way to answer that question is actually to talk to law professors who have to teach this stuff, right? Which I have done. I wrote a piece a few years ago where I spoke with law professors about having to shred their syllabuses every week and redo them because the Supreme Court is overturning precedent and changing the law so rapidly. And some of those professors said to me, in essence, it's hard to really view this as law anymore. You know, law, as we understood it, as we used to teach it, was a set of ground rules that most everybody followed. And when someone thought there was a really good reason to change the rules, then they would fight a kind of uphill battle to persuade a majority of the court. They would lay out their case. The court would usually say no. Sometimes it would say yes, but you know, you knew what the law was. And that's just not true anymore. Like, the law is changing every day, it seems. And the Supreme Court is often changing the law without explaining itself. So it's, again, hard to conceptualize that as law, hard to describe it accurately or fairly as judging. It looks a lot more like a super legislature just passing a bunch of statutes that it thinks are best for the country and doing so without ever receiving a single vote from the American people.
Is that sentiment the one you're hearing from law professors? Is it there, too, with sitting judges? Like, I mean, we've all seen how judges have begun to speak out about this administration through their rulings. I just wonder if they're speaking out in other ways, too.
Yes, in unprecedented ways. We are seeing lower court judges say we can't do our jobs anymore because the Supreme Court is changing the law and not telling us why. And so they're left twisting in the wind, now increasingly making these appeals in public during oral arguments in their written opinions saying, please, Supreme Court, give us guidance. We don't know what the law is. And that is not something we've ever seen before.
Does it piss you off that people aren't madder about this?
Every day. Every day. I walk around. Look, I don't like to be angry and I'm not an angry person.
You're really not.
And I don't want to encourage other people to waste their lives being furious all the time, because I do think that's a bad way to live. But I also believe that people need to be a lot more pissed off about the Supreme Court and need to pay as much attention to the Supreme Court as they pay to the other branches of government. And that's key for me. You know, there's 20 reporters following Susan Collins around the halls of Congress, and maybe one or two at any given moment paying attention to some Supreme Court argument. There's a huge imbalance and asymmetry in how we cover the court that then trickles down to how people think about and pay attention to the Supreme Court. And so, yeah, every June, you know, a handful of decisions get big headlines. But other than that, people mostly ignore it. And that is a problem, because the court is making law. It is making policy. It is in some ways the most important and powerful policy-making body in this entire country. And we cannot afford to ignore it, because it is not ignoring us. It is looking out, seeing many, many unengaged and uninterested citizens and saying, oh, yeah, we can definitely keep getting away with this.
Mark, I'm so grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Mary.
Mark Joseph Stern is a senior writer covering courts and the law for Slate. He's also the co-host of Slate's podcast, Amicus, which covers all of this stuff on the regular. You're going to want to click over there and listen to all of their coverage ASAP. In fact, when you're done listening to this show, I highly suggest you do it right away, like now. All right, that's the show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Paige Osburn is the supervising producer of What Next and What Next TBD. Mia Lobel is the head of audio at Slate. Ben Richmond is our senior director of podcast operations. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. Say hey, I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.